Hello, it's Elizabeth here again. The reason why I'm making these recordings is because I'm hoping that some of this information that we've been putting into practice is going to be able to help not the revolution but the evolution of the future of what it is that we're all going to be capable of creating together. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to take some of the information that I've got to share and be able to make it appropriate for every situation that you encounter in your lives. At the moment, obviously, the situation with Athens is very difficult for us to be able to create a solution for, while we're still operating within the definitions of a corporate system of non-entities. And it's our belief that is holding all of this together. So I just wanted to show you a few things that changed my beliefs about what it is that we're all capable of doing, and how when we work together and follow the history that the Greek people have benefited from throughout these ages, and go back to the original stories and apply those in our current lifetimes. There's something that was created probably without most people knowing, which was a corporation. By copyrighting your given name that you have on the birth certificate, under Admiralty law, it creates a maritime bond, a contract, and they copyrighted our names. And when we then use them, we're actually committing fraud. I touched briefly on it before in the other video. But after what's happened in Crete just recently, yesterday in fact, I think it's very important that people become aware that their names actually are a corporation, they're a corporate entity. Obviously that's a non-entity, but by us using them, we're actually breathing life into the system of fiction. So Odysseus, the story of Odysseus taught us this, which unfortunately I hadn't been exposed to as a child. And when I was explaining this to people here in Greece, they were saying to me, you're talking about Odysseus and the Canenus. What I was talking about was how our names are created under non-disclosure in their capitalized form, which is why it's called capitalism, and all of our energy is being harvested, if you like, behind that name and the use of it. So what happened is, when we registered our children, we actually gave them to Kronos. We gave them to a crown corporation, Vatican structure of Roman codification of fiction and all of the things that go along with commercialism. What they did is they took our names and created a corporation, and they put the creation of that corporation under non-disclosure, aporito. So they made everything behind their trusts and their corporations and their business ventures under non-disclosure. So it's secret, like the Official Secrets Act, for example, in the UK, and the equivalent of the non-disclosure that the police officers, the astronomia here in Greece, would agree that they're not going to breach the non-disclosure to divulge people's data of who they arrested last week and why. Now, I know a lot of that is breached anyway in Greece, in Elada, on a regular basis. However, at the point where we're at, where somebody's in a court, if your name is under non-disclosure, which it is, and you are encouraged and sometimes forced to use it, it's actually statutory rape. If somebody forces you into intercourse, commercial or physical or sexual, it's actually rape if it's not done with your consent. Now, we talked about the 5 things that a valid contract is required to have in order for it to be a valid contract. We talked about a meeting of the minds and the non-disclosure of the terms and conditions that were being created should you enter into this agreement. So, because the fact of the matter is that the parents, the mother and father of the children, were not given the information as to what the registration process would incur for their children, the whole contract that the birth certificate then creates is invalid, because it's been done with the terms and conditions undisclosed. Now that means that every single contract that was created with a capitalised version of the given name is fraud, and for us to use it is false claim. So while they're talking about, such as they were in the court, they're now denying that their own authority, that they gave a piece of paper to say that this money existed. What we're actually seeing, if we look hard enough, is the fact that they're admitting that they haven't got any jurisdiction whatsoever. The whole system is obsolete in any standing, and it's just our belief that's propping it up. So if we remove our belief from that structure and apply it elsewhere, then we will see something else appear instead of this fictional, authoritarian, archaic system, which none of us have consented to. However, we're unconsciously consenting to it by using their money and using the name that they've copyrighted. So there's some links that I'd just like to share with you, which is, it's called, the legislation which they actually did this under is called the Sesketuvi Act of 1666. And they spell it in various ways, Sesketuvi or Sesketuvi Act of 1666. And this was, they set fire to London, actually, in one of them fake terror alerts that goes back all that way. And this is, it's the legalistically dead island. We'll go to the government's website, obviously, because we can trust that not. And it explains to you there, just to, so not to bore you too much with it, it explains that if you were to walk out of the house today and you didn't materialise either dead or alive in the next 7 years, there's a 7-year cooling off period where the family, your family, couldn't claim your estate would be held in escrow. Then after the 7 years, if the body hadn't materialised, the widow or the children could then inherit what was decided to be somebody's estate, for example, your bank accounts, your house, etc. If in those 7 years the body washes up on the shore, it becomes visible, then the estate can be then executed in accordance with the will. Now, what they've done here is they have presumed that we're all dead. One of the terms and conditions that were not disclosed to the people who were creating a birth certificate were told nothing about the fact that they were supposed to take their child every year for the first 7 years of the life of the child to be evidenced as still being alive, to remove the presumption that this body has been dead, lost at sea for the last 7 years. Now, because they never explained that very important part of this contract, the authority that they would take over the use of the name is invalid, because obviously they didn't disclose that information to you. So you couldn't perform under the obligation that that contract required you to perform under, because they never told you that there was a performance of an obligation for you to undertake to ensure that the estate, the 1/8 billion share of this planet and its resources that was held then in trust, to discharge all of the liabilities that any person or any entity or being might have incurred through the lifetime of living amongst a commercial system. This was all created so that they could operate in commerce. We all agreed with this, that if you do it like this, then we'll let you do your dirty business with our resources and you can make your money, as long as you don't cross the line and make business personal. And unfortunately, when the governments became a corporation, business became personal. It was business before, it was separate. There was always the presumption that we belonged to our various governments as chattel through this creation of the Sesketuvi Act of 1666 and the birth certificate system that came from there. So every country in the world who operates a birth certificate system is actually operating a slavery system. Now, it wouldn't be too bad if they'd taken our resources that we've granted them the use of, or our parents did, and they did some amazing things with them, if they utilised them for the benefit of everybody, if they shared them out equally, if they made sure that they weren't contaminated and that people weren't having to work like slaves to buy back their access to their own resources, for example, then you would have got a structure that we can trust. We can all trust that. However, we haven't got a structure that we can trust. By very definition, it's a corporation, which means you can't trust it, because therefore they're not able to hold our assets on trust. So in 1940-something, they created a piece of legislation in the federal courts in America and created Uniform Commercial Code, which allowed them to behave as a corporation acting like a trust, which meant that they could steal all of our assets and resources, hold them on trust, and then sell them back to us and call it privatisation and capitalism. So going to this particular situation with Artemis Soros at the moment, if we look at the story of Odysseus and the blinding of the Cyclops, when I was talking to people about put your name under non-disclosure and therefore you cannot use it, you're not refusing to disclose your name, you're not refusing to identify yourself. You've just become aware, obviously, that you can't. You haven't got anything that you can use without committing fraud. Now, if you use that name that's got Hellenic Republic stamped all over it, then it's clear to see that you're using something that belongs to another entity, non-entity in this instance, and that you're laying a false claim to its capitalized version. Now, what if you were to copyright the spoken name, or copyright the capitalized name with limited next to the end of it, which meant that your liability as a corporation was limited and they couldn't continuously keep harvesting your energy out of the account that's represented by the name. So because the names are copyrighted by a structure that is created by Kronos, and we, the Crown Corporation, as we refer to it, it is allowing our universal energy to be used to support slavery and this complete facade of things that's not real. So we're living in a fiction, and it's only existing because of our belief in the fact that money exists, which it doesn't, that there's anything, that assets and gold and wealth have got a value, which they don't. The people who are the value, and it's our belief that gives something value. If I believe and you believe that this biro is worth 50 cents or one rock or 1 hour of my time, and we both agree on that, then we've got an agreement. So we have a meeting of the minds, and we have an agreement based on what it is that we believe in, and we share that belief. Now, if we all shared the belief that if we were to use that name, it was going to cause us to become incriminate ourselves into a criminal act, which it will if you use it, we're actually realising that we're funding the very system that we're saying that we don't want to support, which is presumption. So unless you've got the facts, and unless you can prove what it is that you're saying, such as you are Artemis Soros or you are Elizabeth capitalised Nolson, then you're actually laying a false claim. So what is it that we're laying a claim to? We're laying a claim to something that doesn't belong to us. So yes, of course, the energy and all of the things that we are without a title, without any definition at all, is ours. And it's only the minute that we try to define ourselves into something that's been defined already for us to be then defined by, is when we step across from universal law with all of our unalienable rights intact, and we actually grant our energy, we consent to, hello, I'm your Vatican debt slave. I don't know what I'm doing, completely incapacitated in my mind, and therefore I need a government, just by standing here and using a name that doesn't belong to me. So by putting it under non-disclosure, like Odysseus did when he blinded the Cyclops, who did this to me? It was Canenus. So the Cyclops goes and asks who, Canenus did this to me? Nobody. So what we're saying is that this isn't a structure for people to hide behind and commit crime with anymore, which is what it's been used for. We want to set a precedence to force the system to actually put us on the stand and force us to breach a non-disclosure. So if Artemis Soros and his community, our community, we put his name under non-disclosure, or he did it for himself, and he said, I can't use it anymore. It's at the moment, it's not a benefit for me to use that name at the moment, because it means that I can be kidnapped and held to ransom by Hellenic Republic in a prison somewhere while they empty his treasury account that does exist, and empty the account so that they can feed themselves by paying for the prison and all of the agents, and creating unjust enrichment from the use of that name. So if he was to put it under a non-disclosure, we would then send a Schedule A. We would serve that with a copy of the birth certificate and the live-born record to say that he was last seen live at a certain place, a certain time, have a doctor go and see him, and create the evidence of life form, that the one that you've been using, which was used for Anthony Santiago of the Philippines, and authorised by the Queen so that they could steal your gold. So if you follow exactly the same structure that they've done, you evidence Artemis Soros as being alive, and therefore cannot then be, under the legislation of the Certificate of the Act of 1666, presumed to be dead, lost at sea. So by actually rebutting the claim that you're a dead entity with no rights whatsoever, which is what you've just done when you've used the name, you're actually going to set a precedence to say, I'm very happy to breach this non-disclosure, but you have to put me on the stand, and if you do put me on the stand and you force me to breach a non-disclosure agreement, then that sets a precedent for every other non-disclosure agreement in the whole cosmos to be breached as well. And they will protect that at all costs, because everything that they're doing, everything that's hidden away and secret, the Vatican, the contents of the Vatican, the knowledge, the secret trusts, where your gold and assets really are being held, are all kept under non-disclosure. Now, if you hold a mirror up to the system and you say, right, this is you, back at you, they lose their own belief in their own jargon and their own false beliefs, and it starts to unravel right in front of you when you start to apply this into their system. So what we would be doing then at that point is, if we would create a debt. So for example, if the man once known as Artemis Soros, who is being currently held at XYZ, is not released unto us as goods and chattel of our corporate entity, which is the Hellenic, the Artemis Soros Hellenis, then we will be charging Hellenic Republic 20 million a day, for argument's sake. There'll be 20 million a day for that, 10,000 a day for false claim, 300,000 a day for trying to enforce a third-party court with no standings order. We have a great long list, which I'm going to show to you, that you can download off the website, which is called the Schedule A, and it's translated into Greek, and you can just add whatever it is that you think is applicable to your charge sheet. And then you give them 28 days to either release the asset. Now we're talking commercial jargon to them as well. So if you're going to treat us all as chattel and commodity, then Artemis Soros is our property, it's an asset of our community, which is the universal law community. He's part of the universe, and we want him back. So if you don't give him back to us, then we're going to start to charge you for keeping him where he is. And as everything is commerce, and the ledger books have to show a profit at the end of the year for them to carry on existing, for their shareholders to carry on investing in them, if you can make that into a debt at the end of the year because you've applied your own charges to this corporation, you are then able, as a community and under their own codification, to go and settle the debt. So if they haven't settled this debt that they've incurred by keeping Artemis for, let's say, the next 3 months, and it's 20 million slave tokens a day, then you times the 20 million times the 31 times the 3, and you've got quite a sizable debt to be able to go and enforce, and it incurs 1% every day that it is left unsettled. You then assign that collection, that debt collection, to the people of the community, who then go back and seize the assets or the goods or the chattel of the corporation that is owing us this debt. So they have stolen all of your assets and resources. I would recommend starting with the Bank of Greece and seizing that particular the asset as collateral to offset the debt that's been incurred on a daily basis against the people of Lada by having this corporation operating in your country without a valid license and without anybody's consent. So because we're all using the name, they're saying, well, we consent to it. So if we all stop using the name and say, well, if it's not a benefit to me for me to use that name, which at the moment it's not. Now, if you're going to claim your estate, then that's a different ballgame. But you can't go and claim your estate by using the name, because once you use the name, you've rendered yourself as a debt slave who hasn't got any property, asset or estate to claim anyway. So it's rather clever what it is that they've done, but at the same time, it's not okay for us to just stand by now and allow this to continue while we know what it is that we're actually incriminating ourselves into by opting for convenience instead of putting ourselves out a little bit to say, actually, you're not going to do this in my name, and I'm not going to support you to persecute other people for profit anymore. So that's what I'm hoping is that somebody somewhere is going to see this and realise that it might be the key in order for us to be able to release Artemis Soros from his current captors. There's also something called habeas corpus, which he has to have served to say what crime it is he's committed. If the money doesn't exist, and he said that it does, then surely he's only the worst made a claim based on information that was given to him by the system anyway when they sealed the paperwork and said that it does exist. So at best it's misrepresentation, and he was misled into believing that anyway by the very system that now says that it doesn't exist. So really we want to know what crime it is that is committed, who it is that they've got there. They're not able to use the name Artemis Soros anymore. It's a copyrighted asset of our community, and we haven't given consent for anybody to use that logo, and therefore it's copyright and intellectual property theft, which we should be countering their claim with, and I'm hoping that that's what somebody's going to be able to do. Thank you.